So our primary goals were how do we talk about the graduate student experience is not just one about sort of difference and sort of what's gone wrong, but what can we do, right? Because we didn't want this to be just about all the things that are wrong with graduate school, but how can we create a space where the door swings both ways, right? So the gate isn't just closed, but it's one that opens. So we wanted to talk about a range of possibility with this project. And to that end, there we go. One of the things we had to have was a really deep conversation about what we mean by diversity and whose graduate student experiences count, right? And what constitutes part of the conversation. I think we're accustomed to talking about race, ethnicity, gender, but in this particular case, we also want to include national identity and immigration status, sexuality, gender identity, class, and social status, which are also very much a part of this process. But we also wanted to include things around student evaluation, so how students are being discussed in departments or not, what kinds of feedback students may be able to get from their departments, disciplinary representation, which has been talked about a lot, not just in terms of faculty members, but in terms of what students get to read, what kind of material students are exposed to, and then just larger notions of departmental inclusion. So there's what happens in the discipline, and then there's what happens in your department. And those can look very different, right? Like Lester talked about where Michigan was and how the Michigan model for bringing in students of color became really prominent. So there are several issues, if you will, that we kind of talk about, because there's the stuff that happens on the front end, and then there's the stuff that happens during, and then there's the stuff that happens on the back end. So one of the first things that often comes up are the many barriers to acceptance to graduate school. So the GRE is probably one of the most prominent. Almost all graduate programs use them or use them in the past tense. Some abandoned the GRE in the wake of the pandemic and found that it didn't really do anything to affect quality. Some schools had already talked about getting rid of it beforehand because we know it doesn't really tell you anything about a student's likelihood of success. But the GRE for some marginalized communities are not really helpful when people are going to school. The other is application fees. So if you want to go to school, most of the time you are paying application fees for multiple schools. And they are not cheap. So if you think of 10 schools and you're paying $70, $60 per, this can be very expensive. And usually the fees are waived only if you are a part of something like a McNair program or something like that. So it can be really difficult for students who may be experiencing financial distress to get into school. The other is mentorship. So we've talked a lot about mentorship that happens within the discipline as we are professionals, but it's also really important for undergraduate students. So when do students get their first contact with the discipline of political science? It's going to be as undergraduate students. And then who encourages students to go to graduate school? It's their undergraduate faculty. And so students know if your faculty isn't telling you to apply for things like Ralph Bunche Summer Institute or SHROP or some other enrichment exercise, if no one's ever told you potentially about going to graduate school, you may not know that that is an option available to you professionally, right? I know anecdotally that was me. Right? If I was not a McNair student, I probably would not have gone to graduate school in political science. And it was actually Ian Lustig at University of Pennsylvania who told me about the Ralph Bunche Institute, not my home institution. And it was too late to apply. So I didn't go to Bunche. But I TA for Bunche. And we'll come to that about why it matters in a minute. We'll talk about why that matters in a minute. Then there's the hidden curriculum stuff, right? Like things that people don't know about going to graduate school because they don't know anybody who's ever done it. So they don't know about how to pull together maybe their research statement or their statement of interest and those kinds of things that are very much a part of getting into a graduate program. They don't know that when they're writing letters to mention a faculty member and the work that they do, that kind of stuff is just left off the table. Campus visits, when we do get students into school, can be very difficult, particularly if a university has students front the cost for those visits. It assumes that people have access to money, to credit, that they can float that kind of expense, that they can do that over multiple days, right? Like these kinds of things are and can be a big issue. There are challenges to retention and graduation. Some point out isolation, right? Feeling like they're alone, perhaps not getting a lot of attention from faculty or having faculty mentors. We were talking about this over lunch. Carol talked about some of this a moment ago, the harassment in various forms that students may experience. It can be in the form of bullying. It could be, about who or how they identify, those kinds of things. The curriculum itself, right? People feeling like they're not interested, that it's dry, that it doesn't speak to them, that it is not for them, right? And so people view the enterprise as not one of interest. And then there's job market and beyond kinds of concerns. So if a student is successful and finishes, the job market presents its own kinds of challenges. One, there may be limited jobs, and we know universities have been cutting back on tenure track positions. You've already talked about joint appointments as an avenue with its own set of issues, but there are also financial limitations to the job market. Again, having a graduate student or a recent graduate fund their own visit to your university for a job interview on the promise that they're going to be reimbursed without interest, of course, that they have access to credit, that they're able to have clothing even for multiple days, right, for a professional interview, are maybe perhaps hard things to, or those are a lot of assumptions to make about people, let's say that. And then the norms of participation in the discipline more generally, right, in terms of conferencing, being able to go, being able to afford, being able to even know that, like, you have to register to get into the corral at ASA, right? Those kinds of things can present some issues. So let's talk about finances, right? This was one that I think students and recent graduates on my committee, but in the ASA report, and we use the ASA graduate student climate survey, that's the proper name. And just to a nod to the point that Sandy made earlier, this survey only had about 300 respondents across all the graduate programs. So it's a very low response rate given the amount of people that we know are in graduate school. There was only one person who identified as Native or Indigenous. There were only about 30 or so students who identified as Hispanic, Latino, you'll see it in a moment, and only 11 who identified as Black or African American. So we didn't do anything fun or predictive with this. These are just mostly crossheads. So most students said that they felt some level of financial security, which I think speaks to probably the funding issue in some schools. And of course, programs are, I think, getting the message at least. We've seen 2 big strikes, right, at Temple most recently, but also at UC, that funding is an issue. About 40% said they were very satisfied or somewhat satisfied with their institution's level of financial support, and about the same amount said they were unsatisfied. 78% of graduate students had some sort of financial support to attend conferences, right? But only 9% had their conference travel fully funded. And I think that makes a difference, especially if students are selecting where they want to go. Female graduate students reported noticeably less financial security and greater dissatisfaction with institutional support than their male counterparts. We can't say why necessarily, but we do know that there's a likelihood that people are receiving less support, maybe just about the institutional choices that they're making. They are also carrying student loan debt, which is also going to be there. And let me just say, I'm talking about these findings in the most general sense, not about any group in particular. There was also greater financial insecurity among those students who identified as bisexual, gay, or lesbian, and students, or gay or lesbian, than students who were identified as straight. And I think this also dovetails with some of the findings we had about people's feelings of their own emotional needs in their programs and not being adequately addressed. And we can talk about that more. There we go. I know this is, I'm sorry, this is really hard to see. I was trying to give y'all a sense of what it looked like. And I do want to say we included the Pacific Islander, Native American students. As you can see, very, very small numbers of those students who answered. And this is just on one question about student loan debt. And there in the report, at least 5 other tables that talk about where students are finding themselves financially. And this question about finances is not just about kind of what students have to do to stay in school. A lot of students do side work. And if you know, a lot of university contracts prohibit students from working outside of their contract with the institution as TAs or GAs or other things. So students could be putting themselves in financial jeopardy if someone really wanted to enforce that. And when we think about students who are immigrants who have visas, this is even more dangerous for them. And students who might be undocumented, this is another layer of potential danger. So it's not just a matter of people having money or not, it's a matter of people potentially having their visas revoked and other kinds of financial offerings revoked. So there were also a number of questions around diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So in general, graduate students were critical of the discipline of political science, whether it came to religion, race, gender, etc. People did not feel that this discipline respected those kinds of differences. More than 60% disagree with the statement that the discipline is tolerant and respectful of differences of socioeconomic backgrounds, in socioeconomic backgrounds, right? Which I think kind of tracks, because we operate, I think, as a discipline as if everybody has access to the same resources financially, and we know that's not the case. On the brighter side, I guess we should say, people were more favorable about their department. And that kind of makes sense in some respects if you think about people choosing departments that make sense for them. So if you have an identity that is marginalized, you're probably not going to choose the institution that is most hostile. You probably didn't apply to an institution that would be at a place that was most hostile. You probably picked that institution because it looked more open to a person like you. So at least people felt like the departments that they were in were more tolerant than the discipline itself. Oh, good, thank you. So this is about the political science profession and its level of tolerance and respect of people like me. I have issues with the question for sure, but as you can see, these there's some big across group differences, right? So if you look at Blacks, for example, even though there are 11 of them, none of them strongly agree with this statement, right? The same is true for people who are identified as Middle Eastern or North African. Same is true for the singular Native American person. The same is true for the Pacific Islander. On the other hand, about 63% of whites were strongly agreed to agree on this question. For people who identify as other, strongly agree, about 70% agree with that statement. But there were a lot of people who demurred, right, and said neutral. So I don't know what we do with that. I don't know if people don't want to say one way or the other. And then when you look at sexual orientation, people who were asexual, there's one person who identified that way, said 0%. And for folks who identified as bisexual, about 38%-ish agreed to strongly agree. Straight people, I think that makes sense given that the world is straight oriented. Gay or lesbian people about, what's that, 4.2, 45.8. It's like 50%-ish, about half said they felt that the profession was tolerant and respectful. And then when you look at gender, you see the distinctions there. Women are a little less sanguine than men about the level of respect that they receive in discipline. People who are identified as men say overwhelmingly that they feel like the discipline is respectful and tolerant for them. And this is table 18, by the way, in the report. So preparedness and support. Now, this was an area where I think at least we can say the discipline and departments are doing pretty good. Overall, the appraisal by graduate students was positive, meaning that most students said that they had 2 or more mentors. I should say when you look by race, however, that breaks down a bit. When you look at Latino, Latinx, Hispanic students, they report having fewer mentors. Now, we didn't know whether these mentors were in their programs or in their school or in other departments across institutions, so we don't know who these mentors are, but people are saying that they have them. Also, most students are reporting that they understand the program requirements, which I think is probably an improvement over where most of us are, meaning that you know what is required of you, what the bulletin says, or whatever they call it, a handbook now, you know, what the requirements are for testing and other things, which I think is a positive thing, because if people know the rules, it probably helps them get to the degree faster. The academic market preparation, most of the students said that they had felt prepared for the job market. Of course, the flip side of that is we do less well for students who don't want to pursue an academic career for whatever reason, right? I don't know that any of us will probably train for non-academic careers, quite frankly, and therefore probably will have a very difficult time training students for non-academic job preparation, but that's an area where we should be thinking, especially given the climate of universities right now. One, because our colleagues in places like Florida, Georgia, and Texas are probably not going to find themselves working in institutions of higher education for numerous and sundry reasons, but also because institutions are scaling back. Conflict management. Now, this was another area where students did express some misgivings. There was little faith that the departments could do a lot to handle student-to-student conflict, and less faith that they could do anything where a student and a prospector had a conflict. And I think we can talk about why that is, right? Especially if we're asked to be the arbiters for our friends and other kinds of things. But in general, preparedness was one of the places where there was sort of broad agreement that departments were doing a pretty good job. So these are just the top line for all students, regardless of race, gender identity, sexuality, etc., nationality, on do you understand what's required of your program, prepare for academic careers, and for non-academic careers. So just you can see those, and that's in the latter part of report. Sorry. So I just put this here because I was thinking about this as I was putting this together. And part of what the challenge is how do we make this thing better? And the way we do it is by talking about the people who are the least well represented. And I made a mistake. Dang it. Thought I had double checked it, but it's people, not people. Okay. So how do we get to this better thing? And I think one of the things that has been said over and over and over again, there's just a lot we don't know. There's a lot of data that is missing. So we definitely need better data efforts, not just in terms of the number of people that are represented. We certainly have to do a better job of that. But the kinds of things that we're asking about and the ways that we ask them. So improved data gathering, and I think there are a number of possibilities, right? John's earlier point, like some of this data, we can talk to our colleagues who are doing the work and talking to folks from underrepresented groups that we're trying to get access to, like Indigenous and Native individuals. There's also the possibility of thinking about partnering with other institutions because NCOPE, for example, or using some of our affiliate groups, right, like Committee on the Status of Asians in Profession or Latinos in Profession, and using those to bring more awareness. And then sometimes we just have to go where people are, right? So if we want to talk to, say, Black graduate students, Clark Atlanta and Howard University are the two HBCUs that grant PhDs. We have to go to them, especially since many of the faculty may have opted out of APSA membership or any relationship to any professional organizations for that matter, right? And so if that is the case, then we have to go to them. And an email blast won't do it, and certainly Kim and India can't do it by themselves. So I think we have to encourage our colleagues and graduate students to do that. The other is having better measures. So one of the things that came up in some of the questions, particularly the questions around sexuality, were whether these questions were the right questions and whether the language was the right language, right? So I just wanted to quote something that someone wrote. One respondent from the survey highlighted the need to update the question around gender identity, because the question says, what is your gender identity? Man, male, woman, female, non-binary, transgender. And this person wrote, these are not gender identifications. I would select female, but what is the point of a climate survey if it makes this type of mistake? So if we want to talk to this community of people, then we need to talk to that community of people about how we might best identify them for this purpose. And then the same thing was said, something similar was said about the question about sexuality, which it asks, with which sexual orientation do you most closely identify? Heterosexual or straight, homosexual, gay or lesbian, bisexual, asexual, other. Explain. And the person wrote, the term homosexual was used as a clinical term to suggest same-gender loving people were psychologically unwell. We suggest using terms that more accurately reflect the parlance of the time. And there were a couple of people who just wrote in queer, right, and didn't use any of those terms. So I think that might be something to think about, in addition to disaggregating this gay or lesbian, homosexual. Like those might be worth doing, including pansexual and queer as other options. And some suggest even making it a sliding scale, right? That since these identities can be fluid, right? And that maybe the way we ask it should reflect that in some fashion. Exposure. So building more undergraduate experiences. I know Leslie's just talking about something they want to do at Johns Hopkins or want to do, but there's only one bunch program, right? And bunch can't do it all. So we could think about expanding SROP. There's also the Poli-Sci Research Lab at Jackson State University, DeAndre Ori runs, that has been a great pipeline for getting students from Jackson State to some really good graduate programs. Princess Williams, Jasmine, these people are out here in the world doing stuff. In part for that, at Howard University, there's the Kanisha Grant runs the pre-PhD summer enrichment program, which is not political science specific, but does have political scientists in it. And that program is, the aim is just to introduce kids who might not have thought about graduate school, about a PhD as an option, to think about PhD as an option. There's also the UC Regent HBCU program that I can imagine could be scaled up, or something smaller could be done. We were able to put one together for Howard and UCLA. There was one between Spelman Morehouse and UCSD. So I think that could be a part of it as well, and just better undergraduate mentoring more generally. I know some of us think of undergraduate mentoring as a pain. It's not something that people want to do, but it is nonetheless critical when we talk about marginalized students into getting into these spaces. Inclusion. So operative anti-discrimination policies, right, I think would be one way to go. And write it down, right? And let people know that it's a thing and it lives, and there are consequences if it's violated, that there's a way that students can complain if something happens and be protected. Chosen name policies would also go a long way to extending to gender nonconforming individuals or trans people, that they're respected and their choices about who they are and how they are in the world are respected. Curriculum, right? So John's point about citations and what we consider to be the canon, even Kathy's earlier point about why we fetishize these three journals and why we say these are the ones, right? are things we can do or things we can challenge in our classroom about what we decide to expose our students to and what they can read. We don't all have to read, Robert Dahl. I know, shoot me, but like seriously. Self-study, right? Like, so part of this is taking stock of what you do as a department. So there's what we do as a discipline, but there's what we do as departments and universities. So holistic DEI policies. So yeah, we can do hiring and retention, but it has to be more than that because for numerous and sundry reasons, these people become saddled down the surface, may not actually be able to make it to tenure and all these other things. And all we're doing is sort of repeating the same cycle of hiring and people leaving and all that other kind of stuff. It needs to be more than a box that we check. Like we went to some workshop and we get a little certificate at the end. Curricular audit. So what do our classes teach, right? If we are all teaching the Introduction to American Politics survey class, what do our syllabi look like, right? I think those would be helpful. So things that we can launch, right? Stop practices that harm. Reimbursements should be stopped, full stop, for graduate students. As a practice, I mean, I know that there might be some issues around state institutions that might be a little bit more cumbersome, but having students shoulder the cost for things like campus visits, for things like job visits, is an undue burden, right? The assumption around people's credit, right? The assumption around people's ability to manage and hold on to those debts until those reimbursements can happen is detrimental. The 9-month pay schedule for student stipends is ridiculous. It is, if students don't have a way to support themselves in the summer, this can present a lot of stress, right? Because right about now, there's some students somewhere trying to figure out how they're going to pay for summer. Luckily, when I was in graduate school, I was a TA for the bunch program, so I was able to make it. But in that last month, I still had to take out a student loan. Lots of students are taking out loans. I know Duke moved to a 12-month process, which, yes, I'm glad it did. But paying students on a 9-month pay schedule when they barely make $15 an hour, I think is what the average student stipend is. I know that there are some variations, like UC just went up, Temple just went up. I think Duke went up and added more money for child care for students that need it, but most institutions don't offer child care. That's rare. So the 9-month pay schedule is a thing. The scholarly fees and the academic fees. So there's things that the university requires you to pay for, like your health insurance, and put some money towards that. We would suggest that taking up a bigger portion of those premiums would be helpful for the insurance. And then when we think about the end, right, not having academic regalia. I know that seems like a small thing, but that's a huge thing. I didn't buy my academic regalia until 3 years ago. I couldn't afford it. It was too expensive. So those kinds of things, the cost of participating in this discipline are high. And the assumption that everybody can take it on is, I think, outstripped. So in summary, what we were trying to do here is talk about the ways that we can make this thing that we do called political science better, right? It's not just about, sort of tearing down, but how do we think about removing obstacles as a real part of what it is we do, right? If we say we care about justice, then that means we have to start thinking about some of these things. And I know I talked a lot about finances, and that's in part because this was a leisurely man occupation. And that is not the world that we live in anymore. Increasingly, our students have children, right? Increasingly, people have, obligations. We're talking about a lot of people who may not have been the people who would have normally been trapped into this profession. But our profession has not kept pace with this diversity. So with that, I will stop. Am I on? Okay. All right. Thank you. And also, some of this didn't make it in. I was also adding stuff as we were going.
So I had 2 questions around interactions with other items related to graduate. One is, many of the things you noted here seem to me to have an indirect effect on mental health of graduate students. almost directed that.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of general mental health best responses from universities, do you have a vision for how we can do a better job in that space? And then the second part is, how do you see collective bargaining interacting with improving the situation or causing more?
So, yes. In general, I mean, we didn't talk about it a lot here, but there were a few items about people's mental wellness. And there were places in certain kinds of students who expressed more mental issues, particularly students who were lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender identified. And those people, along with their colleagues, did not feel that their advisors or departments were well equipped to help them manage those crises. And while it's not here, one of the pieces we cite talks about how having a very functional relationship with an advisor can help students navigate those crises. But I think one of the things that a university can do, I'm blanking on the author's name, it's in the citations, talks about having a very prominent mental health presence on campus, like a counseling services. And if you can make that part of our orientation to the school, not just tell students all the things that we do great academically, but what do our wellness services look like? And I would say if we can even expand that, I think most of the time that's covered by a student health fee. But, making sure that students know that those things may be of no cost or very low cost to them could go a long way to helping students seek the help that they need sooner rather than later. Because by the time most of us see our students who are experiencing some kind of mental health crisis, they are at a crisis. I mean, this is, again, anecdotal, but I had a student come to me at the end of the semester, like, I'm about to check myself into inpatient. So what can I do? And was still thinking about trying to finish coursework. And so had I known, hopefully, sooner, I would have been able to assist. I don't know what I could do beyond, say, go to counseling services, but hopefully I'm glad she felt comfortable enough to come to me and say, I am having a crisis. But the fact that we were at a crisis point made me afraid. But there is evidence that having prominent mental health counseling on campus and making students aware of those resources goes a long way. Also having functional relationships with advisors helps. The collective bargaining piece, I think, actually is important because at least in two of the cases that I talked about, Temple most recently, Temple just ended their strike. I think it started in January. They just ended. One of the things that they were able to do was raise their money to like $24,000 a year. Still not a lot of money, but more than what they were getting. Same thing with the UC system. They were able to raise it to, I think, $36,500. The other thing the students at Temple were able to do was to get more parental leave. They only had 5 days parental leave. They got 21. And then including healthcare premiums as opposed to making them pay for it. The university take care of it. And I think, I think collective bargaining can be really effective. I do think, though, those students probably did suffer a lot of emotional distress because one of the things that happened was essentially the university telling you you're on strike, so your tuition isn't paid, so you're not enrolled, so you're not a student. That is retaliatory and dangerous. And I think it is incumbent upon us as faculty to support our students in those efforts. I mean, we're paying them peanuts. I mean, we've all been grad students. We know how little we got paid when we were in graduate school. And some of us were parents in graduate school trying to do this. I mean, if you were lucky to have a partner or somebody who could help you shoulder financially, then that's one thing. But some people don't have that. So I don't know that it would make them worse off than they already are, because I do think the system, I'm assuming it's supposed to be an apprenticeship, but it can be another form of abuse, right? For our graduate students, the amounts that they get paid are really stressful. And so you do have a number of students who do go for outside work. And I don't think we want that either, right? But students are risking those kinds of burdens just to make ends meet. So I don't know that collective bargaining would do worse than what they're experiencing on their own.
So back to this point, we also raised our stipends, I think, is going to happen certainly at progressive locations, progressive states. We're New York State, so we just went up to 26. No striking, but this was in response to reading the tea leaves, right? Seeing what's happening in California. What I'm not sure about is we're not a greatly endowed campus. So now I don't know what's going to happen. How many lines will we end up getting? We're a big science campus, so of course our science departments fund students on their grants. They look at us like, well, these departments are rather expensive, aren't they? You know, we have to pay for these graduate students. They teach. I think they're tremendous. We actually make our graduate students teach a class towards the end. That's the value. But I think that the consequences are unclear. I'm still not sure what exactly is going to happen. I mean, our budget doesn't seem to be expanding, but our costs are going up. And I can see a lot of pressure at state universities. We're losing lines. What we're getting are full-time instructors or contract instructors. We're not getting tenure track lines. And this, I think, is another trend that we're going to see, which is problematic for our graduate students as they go out. They all seem to be applying now for one-year teaching positions, you know, on contract. So I don't know. I mean, higher education is not in its best location right now financially. Yeah.
But this might be where it's important to think about non-academic careers.
Exactly.
Right? Pivoting, because there are people who are, I mean, like one of my former students found herself, you know, in private industry working in tech. I don't know that that was where she thought the PhD would take her, but it's more lucrative, I'm saying. but you know, but there are people who are willing to pay for the expertise that our students do have, whether it be statistical or philosophical, that are applicable to other areas. And I don't know. So I agree with you. There are ways that this is putting other pressures on, but I think that we can be creative too in thinking about how we think about the training that we give our students as being useful in multiple domains. Because a lot of us probably consult and do other things with our degrees that don't have anything to do with, you know, political science in a traditional academic sense, but can be of service in other places. So I think maybe bolstering some of that, and it might be, you know, I don't know that we take advantage of like employment services on campus the way we encourage our undergraduates to, right? Like there's usually an Office of Employment or something, another, I don't know what it's called, Office of Employment. It sounds like social service agency, but you know what I mean? Like we don't encourage that, or even how to make a CV adaptable to industries that are not, you know, academic. I think that's something we can think about. I mean, here, for example, I mean, the federal government is huge. The federal government is huge, and they are looking for people with skills. I don't know that that's attractive to everybody, but I think being employed is attractive to lots of people. Jonathan.
Systemic, but also idiosyncratic. People can give their own individual accounts about how they survive and
yes.
so forth. But one thing, to me, my experience and then what I know of the research, is decision-making is a key element that is deciding to go to graduate school, which says, particularly for first generation, it's a late decision, which puts you in a disadvantage in terms of choices and funding, et cetera. So essentially, one is how do you try to intervene earlier so that it doesn't put that disadvantage. The other issue I think is what I call best fit. Of course, in Michigan, not necessarily the best situation, but in the late 60s, early 70s, Michigan took an aggressive position to recruit more students of color, predominantly African American and Latino. They went to schools. I know the Latino case, St. Mary's University in San Antonio produced a lot for MA program, so generated a lot of master's candidates who Michigan recruited us. I taught, I think, 79, 80. Every student of color who was under that program came and introduced themselves to me in the first week I was there. And their conversation with me was most negative. I don't like this place. Vastly, they don't understand me. They don't appreciate me. And so the big question is, well, why should you come to Michigan? And most of them were anti-quantitative. So they said, why should you come to Michigan? They had a great financial package. It has a good reputation. So the question is a matter of fit. You know, and now you put on a very young person, how do you make that decision at an institution that maybe have certain attractiveness, but at the same time, in terms of your interest and your potential for success and completion, it's significantly diminished. And so the best fit is this part. And in the middle of March Madness, is there a transfer portal? It is like, and typically, it's not working for me. What other places can I go to? I mean, that's another, right thing, well, I leave Michigan, that's the end of my academic progression. So is there, do people do that? Go elsewhere, they drop out of whatever program they started with. And the other thing is, the ingenuity of graduate students, besides the collective bargaining, I argue is basic survival. Students who feel isolated aggressively sought and developed their own communities outside of their departments. And other graduate students, faculty, that's the way they survived. So survival can be a significant motivation in terms of both persistence and completion. And I think we give students enough credit or enough stretch. If I want to survive, I got to do something other than what my department is doing or the university is doing. And then the last thing on stress, and go back to the Michigan model, one of the mental health stresses I see in Michigan does, being a very good department, very productive department, a lot of its graduates have gone on there. The anxiety level among Michigan graduates, as I said, they're not unique, is they're already worried about publishing and producing work in their first year of graduate school. So the level of anxiety is incredible. I mean, I know generational junior faculty don't think about this in their third year. And so it's a high level of stress, and everything is driven in that way. So that gets the climate. So there's a number of things that come into play that I think we need to sort of recognize and deal with it. But also, I guess the bottom line is that students who do pursue graduate education can be very inventive, creative, survival in conjunction, not only with their own efforts, but with with the institutional context.
So two things really quickly. I think you're absolutely right about best fit, but I think for some students, particularly those who don't know a lot, it's like, is this the best school that I know, and is the money right? And if you're thinking about an academic career, and I don't know that I was and I wasn't, you want to send the best signal you can.
Right.
So if I got into, Princeton, might not be the best fit, but if I have a Princeton degree, that says something. Right. And I think that's how some people select, and they may find themselves in really difficult positions. But I think you're right. Looking outside of your department is a strategy for survival. But it was something you said on the tail end that I also made me think about how the departments can be of help. Because at least for me, Duke wasn't my first choice. Actually, the University of Chicago was. I wanted to go to the University of Chicago. I wanted to go to the city. I wanted to go work with Michael Dolphin. And I went to go meet with him, and he wasn't there. And I was like, okay. And then I looked at the news, in March, and it was cold in Chicago. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. But what really tipped the scales was John Brim called me. John Brim, who then went to the University of Chicago. But he called me. He was the only director of graduate studies that called me. And he called me at my job, because this was 99. We didn't have, cell phones. And I was like, this is the place I should go, right? Because somebody called me.
And real quick is that sometimes so-and-so's there, right? But that so-and-so may or may not be a good person or assistant, especially if they have the opposite reputation, but you don't know that.
Exactly. But this is also something we were talking about at lunch about, like, there are people who have lineages of academic families.
Right.
And I didn't know that was a thing until I got to graduate school. And you don't know that.
Right.
This is stuff that you have no idea about. And thankfully, I stayed at Duke and Paul came the next year, but like, there are just things that you don't know about things like fit. And that's why that mentorship piece is really important at that early stage. Oh gosh, it was something else you said at the end that maybe I wanted to address.
Another question.
I know. And Marielle too. One. It was two. Maybe we could combo them.
You said most of that.
Okay.
Not academic career.
Yeah.
Okay, these can be messaged to other peers.
Oh yeah, they definitely were mine. Marielle.
Thank you. So, talking about the training outside academia, I was wondering if you have any data on that, right? Because if we have, let's say, a trend line, what is it that we're doing with our students? We don't have those skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very often, I hear a lot about the skills that we have to provide undergrads, but not graduate students, in terms of how it's like they can be out there. And as you noted, right? Other people want those type of skills, but what are those, right? I have to see that, right? Because we don't know, we don't do that type of work. So it will be very useful to have some type of survey to really understand, what is it that captures the attention of an employer from the perspective of being a social scientist or a political scientist. And the other point, and this is an announcement more, one of the pipeline programs that is coming out is the mobilization and political economy pipeline program that is going to start this summer at the University of Pitt for undergrad. We just got last year an NSF grant with Fernando Formos and Mara Velez from the University of Puerto Rico and myself. So we have the first class. Please, if you have any interested students who want to apply next year, of course, feel free to shoot me an email.
Yes.
I was going to say that if you go to the website of the graduate school at Duke, there's a whole professional development. There's an assistant dean for professional development. There's a whole panoply of workshops of how to take your CV and turn it into a resume. I mean, Duke is on the forefront of that kind of thing. The stumbling block, however, are faculty. The faculty want to train me, and they tend to be for students, right, who come to professional development, but don't tell my advisor that I'm here because they'll stop working with me. And that, so we have a lot of that, but it's us that has to change and realize that those tenure track positions are not there, that students need to find their passion for what it is they want to do with their degrees. And we have to be supportive of that.
And I think you're right. I mean, even the same thing when people were like, I want to be at a teaching institution. It's like, don't tell my advisor because they don't train you to do anything but our work. I know your last point about the anxiety and the stress. Part of that is that the market is so competitive. Right? I mean, like I was told, you have to have at least a publication before you go out. I was even told by a very senior person who's very famous, like, I don't think I would get tenure now. Because, but we have to also think about that. Like, that bar doesn't keep getting raised by itself. We're doing something to that, right? And so if we want our students to be less stressed and less anxious, we might want to think about how we can find different ways of choosing and sorting students that they don't look like little junior professors coming out of graduate school when they first start, because I'm like, the bar doesn't get raised on its own. And I know some of it is just, we have fewer positions, and so it's stricter and stricter. But are we still selecting on the same things that keep people excluded? Are you R1? Who is your advisor? Are we looking at, or are we looking at a person who looks like they have something interesting to say and they have a trajectory that they're going on, and maybe they need mentorship and maybe they need tutelage? Because as you say, all universities are not equally situated. I was very fortunate to go to a graduate program that's very well funded, and I got into Michigan too and got very close. Thankfully, because Lester and Mariella were very nice to a undergraduate student. But, for those places that don't have those kinds of signals to send about worthiness, because I think if you look at the top departments and you look at who's working there, they come out of the same places. Their CVs look very similar. So maybe we need to do some self-reflection and think about, when we're on these hiring committees, what are the things we are looking for when we're looking at these newly minted graduate students, and think about whether we just want to reproduce what has already been done.
That goes back to your faculty kind of mentality. One is, you have that orientation, you automatically know as being, you're an applying person, right? And then you need to go to the PA program. And the second thing is that basically you sort of stratify saying, I'm not sure I'm going to invest my time in. I think it always kind of insinuates that it develops a certain value. I think there's this mentality that if you're in a graduate program, here's a pathway you take.
Yeah.
And we don't need to consider any other pathways. For the most part, I'm condemning all my colleagues.
No, it is not.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. You all.
We're gonna break out into the breakout sessions. We have 4 groups. And thank you all for sending in your group preferences. So the first group will be in this room. It'll be Paula, Brandon, Ed, Robbie, and Krista. That's the tenure and promotion group. You guys will stay here. The second group is the citation group led by John. That will be Leonie, Andrew, and Keisha, and you'll be across the hall in the office here. Group 3 is climate, and you'll be upstairs in the 3rd floor conference room led by Carol, and that will be Nicole, Sarah, Marilee, Sandy, and Aiksa. I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then the 4th group will also be on the 3rd floor in the smaller library to the right, and you get upstairs. Yambi, Mike, Diana, Will, and Lester. So let's take about 30, 35 minutes, so come back.
Okay.
Yambi, your water.
I think I pulled it over here, but I didn't open it. So if you wanted it, it's okay.
No, I'll get one.
Okay.
Fine, I wasn't sure.
No, I didn't open it though.
What is so sorry? You talked to me.
Yeah, we are going to, yeah, we just, yesterday we did the last conference. This is how much work, right?
Oh, all right. It's definitely when we did our first one in UCLA.
I would. I got a call at 4:30. Yeah, I was thinking of you.
My email.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Which I, yeah, so I'd love to, okay. And you have to appreciate my position in all this. I never had academic job in my life. And so being able to say, to offer it. Yep, Ed.
Yeah, it's over there.
Yep. Our phone was there. Yeah.
Remember you both over there at the same time?
Yeah,
That's how me and Monique became friends. We met on our visit.
Oh,
We were all in the mix.
Oh my God, yeah.
That's why I didn't come.
Yeah, we ended up having a big party.
I remember it.
219.
Yeah, we got to take that fruit.
Got one minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, Janelle comes to great work. I mean, great that I.
Talk about that thing, you know. Now it's trying to. Robert, step down here. And Clarence is back. I thought he retired. No. Okay. So here's the thing. They look for new chair.
Okay. So we're gonna report back. Thank you for engaging in the work. I'm gonna try to attempt to write on this write a report. And so you were able to select whatever topic you wanted to talk about. If you talk about one of these topics, we'll write it down anyway. So who's gonna report back for your group?
I don't know, Crystal is taking, notes, but anyway, okay.
Do you have any most pressing capital, what question did you address?
We did number 3, identifying 2 or 3 top priorities.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. One of the things we talked about was whether or not, APSA, like some universities, could have toolkits, basically, for what APT committees could use to make sure that their processes are the level playing field, that people can identify biases in letters, just a whole host of things. And maybe drawing on what other universities have done, that APT committees in the department should have some training, before they, we assume that we all know what we're supposed to do, and the answer is we don't. But it would be nice if there was an APSA toolkit on tenure and on these kinds of things. One of the things, a point that Robbie made, and this is something that would require some wordsmithing, but on letters, at R1s you expect to have letters from people who are R1. But what Robbie was saying was it's the scholar, not the institution. So that, and something like at Duke, if there's a letter from someone who's at a non-R1, well, you write up a statement as to, well, this person used to be at MIT, but then they realized they wanted to live on the coast, and so they're at or something, but this is the top person in this area. And so it's the person, not the institution and what they've done. So that the assumption is that you have to write up, who these people are and why you went to them. And it's not necessarily the institution. We talked about engaged scholarship and how institutions should think about what that means. First of all, it's not just writing an op-ed, but that when you're going to be engaged scholarship, it's based on research, right? And then we kind of went after the top three. Not all the work that people do are going to fit in the top three, right? Some of the top three are not going to be, amenable to that work. Maybe departments need to think about what are the top journals in the field that the candidate is working in. And instead of having the generic, you have to have articles in the top three, that you're working in this area. And these are the top journals that people in your area consider to be the ones that your work should be appearing in. So if it's there, and it's not in JLP, well, that's fine. And I think we just have to stop making the assumption. And we talked about, that one that if it's in one of the top three, it's good.
Right.
Because there's a lot of crap in those journals. And we know that, right? And some of it might be ours. But also on the other side, we need to make sure that junior scholars are not under the assumption that if they get an article in one of the top three, that somehow that means they're going to get it. Mm-hmm. Because there's more involved in looking at a person for a lifetime appointment than just whether or not you got an article in one of the top three. Because that might be the only thing you'll ever have. And so that's where we were. We had a great discussion.
Thank you. I just have one follow-up to the suggestion about departments maybe shifting what the notion of the top three is and tailoring that notion to the scholars research.
Mm-hmm.
How can that be institutionalized? Does it have to be in writing? Does it have to be something you just nudge and tell your mentee? What ways can the department make that a reality so that it's clear and communicated in a transparent way?
coming from George Mason, that is an R1 now, but we don't have those type of standards. I think it is the conversation that happens in the room with the colleagues saying, you know, this person works on this, so therefore, so it's kind of an information campaign, advocate kind of role of those who are within the field and say, you know, she works on federalism, this is the top journal on federalism. So having those type of conversations, and we know bargaining models, right? So that really influences the outcome.
Yeah, so I'm gonna say, this is from organizations where there's a drawer project, I don't know if anyone knows about drawer, but it's a science project that says, who cares about what you're publishing? It's an average impact factor, across that average, there's huge variation. The goal is to find if someone is going from associate to full when they've established a profile, so difficult to junior level. But the notion is we're evaluating the person and not the job.
Right.
Right, so we're looking at what that person has done, and so your project in science is being to just push off any reference to impact factors in journals. Rather talk about the person, what they've accomplished, resonance in their work and so on. Now, I don't know if you generate enough for the person, if they're coming up to tenure, to have that strong individual profile to still falling back on the averages, which, you know, most of like some of these articles in these journals never get cited.
Exactly.
So it reads somebody, okay, you made it, but who cares? Right, so anyway, so it doesn't make it kind of look at your project, it may look better science, but it is a major push to get away from this impact factor.
All tenure and promotion committees would have a chair. And I think it would be the chair's responsibility to look at the journals that the person coming up for tenure to know something about. Because even if you're in a subfield, American politics, there are so many different journals where Americanists can publish. That would be a directive that could be put into the department should be responsible for doing this, or in the T&T file. Candidates should be telling us explicitly about the journal. I don't think that's what we communicated as a candidate.
Yeah, so along those lines, we have a plan of organization in our department that has ABT in it. That describes explicitly what the steps are functionally, also kind of what the expectations are for excellence. But that historically has had an appendix with included journals. I don't actually like that because I think for whatever's excellent is excellent. But at least the candidates have something that they can look at and start a conversation with leadership.
I think part of this might be on external evaluators too, in terms of helping to have experts contextualizing in the letter journals, both to help the department out, but also the letters are going to travel on through the process, and helping the people in English understand what a good international relations is. Part of that, now having to write these letters, you don't get any instruction on what they look like, and you can't see any models because they're confidential. And so something that APSA could do that I think would be really useful is like an article in PS or some kind of like best practices for using an external evaluator. What's an outline of a good external evaluation letter look like? Something that lots of people know a lot about, but
Even anonymized.
just make one quick point, just kind of following up on Michael's point, and some of these others. I think it's like from a broader perspective, I think it's discourse and norms have to change. And I think comparative politics and IR, we were talking about a little bit about, are a little better on this. They have more. I think they're not as locked into the so-called big three as American politics is.
Right.
Because I know in IR, although we did talk about IO. ISU, JCR, there's, in addition to those others, compared to that CCS, world politics. So yeah, I think it's a norm thing, and kind of like what Michael was saying, like, it's gonna be, it has to be a slow moving train, I think, to try and break those norms, because I think a lot of Americans are locked into, but hopefully, I don't know, that's not a real clear recommendation.
But it's a clear example, for instance, on the Census Bureau, when they have to raise questions, we sometimes use examples. And every time they use specific examples, the number of responses to those examples increase. And so highlighting journals in the kind of cues people saying, oh, that's what they're looking for. And therefore that becomes a normative part of evaluating what's been published.
Sorry, I don't want to talk too much, but another thing we do is if we have candidates that have a very diverse kind of research profile, we'll write an MOU with them, describing what they see as the most excellent outlets in their area of research. That MOU is then shared forward through the tenure process, so that everyone can coordinate on it.
That's cool.
Can I just speak things on that? So the letter right issue connects to the top 3 issue in terms of, again, disaggregating excellence from institutions. So to say, like if, for example, the department did what you said, and they've got a set of journals which are the appropriate journals for this work and make the best out of this work. But then there's another level where the expectation is, well, now we'll go and we'll write to all the R1 institutions and get a set of letters from the R1s who won't, chances are a lot of them writers are not going to give any credit to these journals. Then it's going to unravel the whole thing. So the thing about disaggregating excellence from institutions and fora is really, I think, really important, which is not to say that it's just an empirical question. Is this good or not? You can't determine that from the basis that it's at X university or an X journal.
Okay, thank you. That was great. Group number 2 is the citation group. Who's reporting? I think I am doing it. Okay. Which question is here? I don't really know. Yeah, very good conversation, but all those questions you take.
2 or 3.
What would you like to share that? So I think what the first thing I wanted to say is, trying to move away from just talking about citations to thinking about the impact of one's work. Right, so get away from the numbers game and talk about the satisfaction that comes from people reading your work, from it having some resonance with an audience, and we'll get back later to even entering the public domain to speak about that work. So we will largely focus, I think, on sort of workshops, helping early career and graduate students, scholars, understand this process and think about it. So we were thinking about ABSA. We know that there are some professional development workshops, but we were thinking about perhaps hooking up with novel sections who do this, but bringing in authors editors of the relevant journal to that subfield, and holding a session at ABSA that will help these scholars understand how the process works. And get these journalists to talk also about things like what kind of work gets picked up. And again, I'd rather use that term than just like numbers. So what kind of work has influence from their perspective? And again, this is helpful because it's talking about your subfield journal potentially, which, as we all agree, can have incredible effect on the field because you've got the right people reading it. Like if you publish in a journal that no one cares about that kind of work, they're not going to have influence it. So we're sort of trying to bring people together, editors and early career scholars, in a session to help them understand the publication process, how they can think about their work in ways that will help them understand how it does get picked up. The sort of being the first idea sometimes, like the first one to do it, that often is one citation, but it also means you're a pioneer. Like I hate the gaming part of this. I don't like it. I like to think we're really helping people understand how to do work and how to think about problems. And I think we don't want to be like influential, right? I mean, if you're going to spend all that time thinking about it, you'd like to think that it has some influence on somebody. So having something like that. We also talked about, the second part of that was also talking about how to have some public act for your work. So helping maybe graduate students of the career scholars to communicate their research in ways that are effective and so some places may have, we have a communicating science center at Stony Brook where scientists taught how to communicate with media. Or something like that could also be very helpful. And again, we're thinking it's a package, right? If you are out there in the public domain, it has some synergistic effect with your work. Talking about maybe what you want to do is write a monkey cage speech. So these are workshops. And, you know, I'm sure no one sections will jump on this, but if we can somehow figure out how to stimulate interest and holding such events, it would be really good. So we have a broad range of it, but the other thing we were talking about too was having a session with journal editors and publishers. Cambridge is your publisher, perhaps the journals, I don't know if you hold strategy sessions, but so you have an annual strategy session with the journal editors. So you can also bring in these issues of, I don't know if they come up in those sessions, about breadth of citation to the articles that are coming in and how you're already doing that. Is that already happening with the journal editors? You're thinking about those things?
Meaning issues around citations?
We're talking about, John was mentioning in the IR field that will encourage the editors, will encourage people to think about broad citations, which includes a greater number of women, scholars of color, and so on. So have that a major consideration with Cambridge leading the charge, sort of talking about that, because I think from the publisher's perspective, this is all good, right? They're trying to increase the breadth and scope of readership. So they have an incentive in trying to make sure that these articles have the broadest possible reach. So, I mean, you know, do you look those in Washington? I mean, I know sometimes they can be nice, the publishers, if they have money, can bring the editors in, and, you know, it can be a valuable session, session.
Right. I mean, Cambridge has sessions with the editors and editorial boards.
I'm not talking about that.
Yeah, and then we have the staff have strategy sessions with Cambridge as well, like an all-day strategy session.
But I'm thinking bringing the journal editors into that strategy session, right? Because what Cambridge can do is provide statistics on what articles got picked up that year, you know, so that the editors are aware of what the metrics look like, who's submitting, presumably Cambridge can help keep track of these things, or the journal editors keep track of them.
We have Cambridge is keeping track of that, and then we also have data on that too. Yeah.
But I think that having the journal, not the editorial board thing is another thing, you know, that's another conversation, but having the publishers, the editors, seems to be, having been through that, very valuable.
Right. Okay. Agreed.
And also, it also open access. It's such a moving, changing, crazy landscape.
It is, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, this is something that, if the editors are educated on this, which I don't think editors are, right, most editors don't understand what's happening to the publishing world in terms of income.
That's right. That's right.
But once they understand that if they're brought into a workshop at a session level, they can try and help educate people. And I go, I don't know how it works, you know, but increasingly we're going to have to worry about how it works.
Definitely.
Because someone's going to have to pay for it.
That's right. That's right. And the publishers haven't figured out how to pay for it.
Well, we know that some of them, I know they have some, Wiley, I haven't figured out, but they've already they have arrangements with certain library consortia where they'll cover so many authors to publish open access for free, right? This is that's the European deal.
Right. 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 But that's not it's not a financial model that will work long-term for the publishers, because there'll still be a lot of authors left out, and the new transformative agreements don't replace the subscription revenue that they're losing. You know, and so it's a very complicated.
But I think it's relevant to publishing citations, all of these things. I mean, all of this is things that they're going to have to learn more about business that they're in.
Yeah.
Financial
Sure.
businesses has been giving up for free, now we have to pay to give them more, money on. It is crazy. So I think that's one.
That was one more, though. We talked about workshop strategy, this is a part of enhancing one citation visibility. But workshops in educating scholars how to maximize their visibility, exposure to enhancing their citations. Is sign up for Google Scholar page, how to promote your work either in the public domain. That is, there's strategies to keep self-citations. I mean, there's something that some people do know about, but it's not uniformly disseminated across their either graduate training or career. So, what individuals can do in this domain to enhance their visibility and potentially their citation.
Yeah, I was going to use those with the journal letters, they can be separate and alone, and we want to get away from self-promotion. Self-promotion is making sure your work has impact, right? I mean, it is self-promotion, but how is your work, right? If you can find it, it's helping people find the work. You know, it's not just self-promotion has an aggressive ring to it. We need to get away from that because it's not the possible way to do it. It's like, you're still doing it. How is your work going to get noticed? Visibility. Thank you. Three, climate. Okay, so our discussion kind of mirrors many of the topics that we've been discussing so far, but I think one of the issues that I think also came out last week at the Georgetown meeting is how is it that we can support our colleagues and also us when it comes to retooling many of the things that we know and we need to relearn, right? So, for example, how is it that APSA can serve as a space to perhaps provide workshops on how to diversify your syllabi, how to decolonize your syllabi, how can you do that for introduction to American politics? What are the reading lists that are there that are just a set of resources to do that? I've been to, at my institution, we do doing that, and I have to say that the people who provide those type of workshops, they don't have the training to do it, and they're very terrible with it, and then you have these spillover effects because people don't want to go to them anymore, right? So having trained people who can do that effectively, besides personality and charm, I think that's important. And then the other discussion that we had is the need to have systematic data. So, for example, we were having a discussion about the survey from 2017, whether it can be repeated. To have more information about harassment, the profile of police design, so forth. So those were the main discussions.
Yeah.
One that from members of their doing on sexual harassment.
Yeah, that's right. So
Yeah.
Steve's reminded me that there is a group of scholars, forgive me, but I've forgotten their name, but they're partnering with APSA, and they're working on another survey that's kind of a follow-up to the 2017.
To the Shapiro and Campbell. To Shapiro and Campbell.
Right, it offered.
I don't know where they are.
Oh.
As members, or even former members, you
Yes.
can receive a survey that says, we want to survey your experiences on FIC. So that's relevant to this particular point. So.
Yeah, this is Hunt and colleagues at Alabama. Thank you so much for summarizing our discussion. I would just add in that we also brought forward the notion that APSA could serve as a clearinghouse for these kinds of trainings, for example, that might diversify curricula and could host some of the best sources of training, downloadable resources at the APSA website,
I'm aware of University of Michigan's advanced program that is a treasure trove of resources, including for diversifying curriculum and training E&T committees. And then the University of New Hampshire has a really good theater program, interestingly, that teaches participants how to diversify syllabi. And through these illustrations in the theater program, you understand, oh yeah, that really is important to decolonize my syllabus. And one additional thing, APSA stating very strongly and joining in with other professional associations its stance on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion really carries weight for home institutions. We can point to a mandate from APSA and other social science associations and a form of legitimizing the efforts of the home institution, and this can help overcome resistance that naturally occurs. APSA's voice can be amplified as it coordinates with other special systems.
You have a certification on the syllabi, is that like a syllabus bank that is more diverse, more inclusive in that sense? Because I know REP has capital syllabi on their website. I know the Migration Citizenship has that. So we don't know, syllabi bank, or I'm not quite sure.
I think that, but also I think what Marilyn was mentioning is that how do you decolonize your syllabi? What does it mean? Maybe when I you don't have an idea of what does it mean to decolonize. The science from that basic level, I think is needed. Excellent. Group 4.
Okay.
Last year, grad students.
Yes. So we
Did you answer, or were you?
we were mostly doing it recommendations because we were like, we know what the problems are. So one of the things that's offered is at University of Maryland, there's a Rising Scholars Conference, which helps students present, but also check out the University of Maryland. And it's increased applications, I think it's at 100.
Yeah,
37%, right, from minoritized communities. There's also the waiving of application fees and student fees that hit international students particularly hard. The other that Diana suggested was making a common sense list for departments of small steps they can implement to facilitate more inclusion. You know, we talked about the reimbursement thing. Michael talked about, well, that's difficult in Pennsylvania, but we could think about things we could do around fees, perhaps even doing startup funds or scholarships or something like that for graduate students, because I had never thought about the fact that they have the same moving expenses that faculty have when they're coming to a new place, yet get nothing in return. Abandoned GREs in some cases, or making a firm no on GREs if that's what in fact we want to do, because optional might confuse students. Having students include a resume, because there might not be a real attention to the things that make them particularly strong applicants on their statement of purpose, which all of us don't get trained in how to write. Interviewing students is another good way of maybe testing out this fit kind of issue. Lester brought up this really interesting kind of process that Michigan has, where Michigan alumni mentor current Michigan students. That could be really interesting. And to dovetail with what they're doing at Penn State is maybe having those same mentors from a non-academic, who work in a non-academic setting but are still very much within the discipline, acting as mentors for students as they're thinking about or considering non-academic jobs, but are very much still engaged in political science. And then another was having a way to evaluate grad students in an annual fashion. And there are a few ways to do that, but giving students some sort of written evaluation so that they can understand sort of where they are and how they're doing so that no one is kind of caught flat-footed. And then another thought was to also provide or figure out a fund for helping students as they try to navigate life post-graduation. So maybe helping to help them with professional clothing or attire that they might need for professional presentations or other kinds of things. And then expanding notions of what professional development means. So that could be some of the things we've been talking about today about sort of editorial responsibility, citations, and how to be more responsible there, but also thinking about the market in more expansive fashion, talking about what do we want to say, increasing visibility, which is now part of what we all have to do. Like, I didn't know that you should have a website, for example, right? Those kinds of things that might go under professional development that we might not normally think of, but are now more part of the gig, as it were. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add, but that's just something.
Yeah, I don't have one thing. What we've been doing at Hopkins in general is trying to be involved in that integration project that I talked about earlier. So what we've tried to do, working on the assumption that some segment of graduate students are perform suboptimally because they don't see themselves as a discipline, is they worked with us to help integrate race into the discipline. I mean, you mentioned this. So Johns Hopkins is the first political science department in the world. So the racial history that Paula talked about is actually our fault. So what we do is we've acknowledged that and not only changed the way we admit graduate students reflect that, but we've changed the way we teach the discipline, and we've been having the graduate students work with us to basically
what they've been leading, so they've been doing all this research on the history of the political science department, what King and coming up with. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to know.
And also, you all do a more holistic admissions process too.
Yeah. So the professionalization part is bringing those again. This professionalization, yeah, but we have to remake the discipline. And this is us. It's not, we can't wait for the next generation to do it. We can't wait for some exogenous force or the exogenous force of the crisis. That's what we've been doing.
Oh, and also Diana had talked about having a list of pipeline programs, right? So we can capture all these different projects that are happening all over that we might be unaware of that we can help push our students towards.
One question for the Johns Hopkins. So what happens once you work with the grad students, they complete their research? How does the integration process work where you fold that back into the curriculum or into what you do in the department?
So right now, this might change, right? But right now, what they've been doing is they've been retrieving the history of the department and connecting it to the broader trends in discipline. They've been presenting that. They've been running it, basically. So they've been presenting it to faculty as well. They're writing kind of reports. And what we're hopefully going to do is part of that, to write an article with them. So it's folding it all into the process.
And then fold that back into the discipline, fold that back into how we teach both graduate students and undergrads.
Yeah, and then they teach undergrads as well. So in many ways, what we found, it's our own peculiar ecology, but what we found is that if you empower the grads to do a lot of this stuff, they're an incredible force for doing it, because even the ones who aren't even studying REP, they're all really interested in it anyway, in this collective group. And they don't have you know, like that some of the faculty might be interested but not really at the time or not really care. Maybe not in a bad way, but you know what it's like. So there's no resistance to the rest. And they'll go and they'll do it, and if some faculty turn up, some faculty turn up, faculty don't turn up, they'll still carry on doing it. So and they're that kind of cement between the research profile of the department, the training, and the undergrad teaching as well, in many ways.
And Hopkins it's not like we have a lot of graduate students. So similarly, it's not like we have a lot of Black and brown students. So it's really, it's a graduate student project that's actually, Black and brown students are involved, but it's mostly white graduate students. Again, many of whom aren't what we consider REP scholars.
So before we close out, I want to say thank you for that. We're going to take an old-fashioned photo of this. Transcribe it, make sure you all receive it, and then for the ones that are for AFSA, we'll have discussions about that internally and share with our staff committee, the organized sections, the AFSA council as well. I'm sure will be very interested to hear about the work that we've done here as well. Paula?
So I was just gonna, add one caveat, not caveat, but, yeah, it is a caveat to the no GRE. No GRE does not equal equity.
No, it doesn't.
Right? It how faculty evaluate the file. And there's so many things that they can revert to that also have the same biases as the GRE, like GPA.
For sure.
Private institutions are high inflators. Duke is a high inflator, right? When you have the average of everybody graduating, it's about an A minus, right? There's no differentiation. Public schools have inflated less, right? And HBCUs really not at all, you know? So that a B is a B and a D is a D, right? So, but if you revert to GPA without understanding those same biases, you're just exchanging one for another.
Yeah, we were more concerned about the cost associated, not necessarily that the GRE was predictive of anything or would eliminate bias, but that cost on top of all the other things. And it's not predictive of anything.
Before we go, I just want to also thank you so much. Also mention that AFSA is currently engaging in its strategic planning process for the 2022 through 2026.
2024 through 26.
24 to 26. Thank you. Throughout the year. And so all of this information, your contributions, the research, the findings, the recommendations from your task force, the strategy will be taken into consideration as we undergo that particular process in terms of how we move forward in a strategic way. So I want to thank you for that. One last thing, if anyone is investing a summer program this year for undergrads, for grads, please raise your hand. Get 5 seconds to name, highlight, and give the name of the program, and then we can connect you all about that. So we'll start on this side. Georgetown Department of Government is running a thing called the Political Science Pre-Doctoral Summer Institute, which we did the application process. We already have the 20-ish students who are coming from the 5 states around here a week-long boot camp on what is political science, how does the discipline work, how is it divided, what are the methods, what are the different career tracks that you can take, how do you prepare an application, how do you think about being a political scientist. The idea is to bring a good number of underrepresented students from underrepresented backgrounds to help them to imagine themselves in this discipline as well.
Lester.
We have John Hopkins, that name sucks in the Department of doing summer school for racial politics. First week of June is for graduate students from around the country. Like teach. Because to think about racial politics in more of an integrated fashion.
Ours just are off list for, do we have a class yet?
Yes, we do have a class. They're all accepted and they'll be coming your way. Soon.
Why do you guys have to share to write letters for those applicants? So that they're in, they're in political science? My cat was on my chair with math.
Marilyn? I already said about mobilization and political economy, 8 weeks at 6. We already have the first class for next year. Excellent. And it's a good.
Okay. And I know there is a program at Howard that's a pre-doctoral.
Yeah, Dr. Kanisha Grant in political science is running that pre-doc. It's not specific to political science.
Yeah.
It's getting like undergrad to go to grad school.
Thank you.
Wow, let's give us all a hand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, we'll be in touch with resources. You all are keeping in touch. So safe travels.
Yeah. Thank you.